Why, hello there. This video is inspired by my new good friend Mickey, who really wanted some oatmeal raisin cookies with some walnuts, but who wanted to try to make it a little bit less added sugar. I will admit this is not a keto or a sugar-free oatmeal cookie recipe, and I've made a couple of adjustments in order to reduce the amount of sugar, I hope. So what you see before you is all the ingredients that we're going to need today. We are going to need, of course, some rolled oats, some flour, some baking soda. I've got vanilla extract. I've got an egg here, some butter, some cinnamon. I do have regular brown sugar. I know that they do make low sugar substitutes for brown sugar, but I don't have any on hand, so I'm not going to experiment with that today. I also am replacing raisins with dried cranberries because raisins have about 3 times the amount of sugar in them as cranberries do. And just because I love pecans, I'm using pecans instead of walnuts. So in just a second, we're going to go ahead and get our ingredients prepared, but I will tell you the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use this big mixer to cream some things. So in my lovely mixing bowl right here, I have my softened butter and I have my brown sugar, and I also have what I'm using. You're not going to find this if you're watching this in the US, but it's Stevia basically. I have substituted my regular sugar for Stevia. I've also added just a little bit more butter to compensate because Stevia can make baked goods a little bit dry and crispy. So all that I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a paddle mixer attachment, and I'm going to mix this on about medium speed until it is creamed, 1 to 2 minutes. So here we go. Creamed mixture. Now the other thing that we're going to do is add our vanilla extract. We need a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and we're going to add our egg. And we're going to beat these until they are fully combined. No pieces of rando egg laying around in there. We don't need to mix it too terribly high. Again, maybe just on low-medium speed. Now you may notice that not all this is getting mixed in there, and you would be absolutely correct. Very important when using any kind of an electric mixer is to scrape down the sides of your bowl before the mixing is finished. And then continue mixing for probably another 30 seconds maybe. It's not going to be too terribly long. You may also notice that this looks a little bit curdled, and that's okay. Once we add our flour and our oats, you're never going to notice. Perfect. We're going to move over to our other counter. We're going to mix up our dry ingredients and then come back. So I have here a small mixing bowl because we don't actually have a lot of flour and things to add. We're going to begin with 1 cup of flour. And I'm just going to be doing my mixing with a normal soup spoon today. We're going to put in a ½ teaspoon of cinnamon and a ½ teaspoon of baking soda. And then finally, 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And now we mixy. Before we do our final mixing, I almost forgot, silly me, I do need to chop my pecans because I bought pecan halves instead of pecan pieces, which is totally cool. For those of you who are like my grandma and were lucky enough to have a nut chopper that you just drop in the nuts and then you push the grinder and it makes nut pieces, that's fantastic. I don't have that. So I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way with my chef's knife. I'm going to take as many pecans as I'm going to add to the cookies. Since pecans are not an original part of this recipe, I'm actually doing half the number of pecans with half the number of cranberries and then adding the oats into that. So I'm going to chop about this much, about a ½ cup of pecans. It's very important, just like always, with knife safety, that your hand stays away from the sharp part. So I'm going to keep my hand up here. And honestly, the nice thing about nuts is that they break apart really easily. So I'm just going to sit here for a while and rock my knife back and forth until I get pieces that are the size that I would like them to be. And that just about finishes up the chopping of our nuts. Now we can go back over and finally mix our cookie dough. So it's about that time. What I'm going to do is lower my paddle back down and slowly mix in the flour a spoonful at a time on low speed. You will have to be careful because sometimes flour can spit up and out, and I don't have a splatter guard, so just make sure that you take your time. And it's perfectly okay to let that get all wet before you add your next spoonful. And don't forget to keep your rubber spatula handy in case you've got to scrape the sides. So that's all of our flour added. I'm going to pause this and scrape the sides down for good measure. And then we just get to add all of the stuff that goes on the inside. This doesn't look like a whole lot, but we've got a lot to add to it. And I'm actually going to fold that in using the spatula. I'm going to stop using the motor part of the mixer here, which means I got to get all of the cookie dough off of my paddle. Alrighty, so it's time to add our oats, our cranberries, and our pecans. I have my pecans right behind me. I'm going to measure out my oats first, and I'm going to need 1.5 cups of these oats. And then I'm going to need about 1/2 cup of my cranberries. You know what? I'm going to sprinkle in until I think it's 1/2 cup because these are actually really hard to measure. There we go. That might even be a little bit more, but who doesn't love cranberries? And finally, in go the pecans. Boom! Let's do some folding, shall we? Make sure you really get all the way to the bottom and that you get everything wet. All the oats and all the filling. And there we are. That's going to be finished cookie dough. Now, we do need to refrigerate this cookie dough for 30 minutes, but that gives us a chance to preheat our oven, I believe, to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. But we're going to cover this and stick it in the refrigerator. I'll see you in 30 minutes. Let's prepare our cookies for baking, shall we? So I've got here my refrigerated cookie dough. My oven is preheated indeed to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, or give or take 175 degrees Celsius. And I've got my spoon here. I'm going to use about a spoonful worth of dough. It's a little bit tricky, about this much. And I'm actually going to take that off of the spoon and roll it into a ball. Yes, this will be a little bit messy. It can be easier to go ahead and get all your spoonfuls together and then do this, but I'm doing this to show you. We'll put that here, and then we'll flatten it out a bit, like that. Because it is going to spread out just a little bit, and we'll probably be able to put 3 cookies, and 2. And then we're going to bake these for 10 to 12 minutes. So I'm going to rejoin you once I've got my first batch fully baked. Exactly 12 minutes later, these beautiful babies have come out of the oven. These are perfectly cooked, which is to say extremely light brown, mostly around the edges. And the tops of these cookies, we'll see if I can't touch one, are set. That means that they're not jiggly or moist, but we're going to have a lovely soft-baked oatmeal cookie here. So, there you have it. Oatmeal, cranberry, and pecan cookies. Enjoy.